Yeah,
You're starting? Okay.
yeah, bro. I'm starting. You wanted to say something?
No, no, just
Okay. Am I audible? I'm assuming yes.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, guys. Good evening. I welcome you all to the second training session being conducted by the Revolutionists, the English Debating Society of Shaheed Bhagat Singh College. Uh, it's great to have you all here on a Saturday evening. Actually surprising, but chalo, I hope not to bore you for the next like jitna bhi der ye session chalega. Okay, so what exactly are we going to do today? So this is how the session will majorly pan out, right? I'll talk to you about majorly about two things, but before that, the interaction in today's session will be restricted to chats like yesterday, but I'll be taking questions periodically and will be opening the floor for for answers also at times. So if at any point in time I'll be looking majorly on my screen and I might miss out your chats, so if at any point you have any doubt or anything, please keep typing. Periodically, I'll keep checking and keep responding. Okay, okay, cool. ठीक है. What exactly are we going to do today? Yesterday, we had a fruitful session where Omer gave you a fair idea of exactly what you are expected to do in a parliamentary debate, ranging from what is a motion, what is a debate, what are the different speaker roles. I hope you guys have at least some sort of a semblance of clarity about those things. Assuming that, I'm gonna go forward and talk to you about today about two major things. One is what is the structure of an argument, and secondly, what is edging, who is an edge, and basically everything else in a very brief manner about the adjudication process, right? In that, what is the structure of argument and why is it so important? Okay, what is an argument necessarily? Yesterday, Omid told you in depth about what are you expected with respect to different speaker roles, what are you expected to do with respect to different motions, but what is that one thing which is expected out of you, regardless of what motion there is, what speaker role you are representing or what side you are on. That one thing obviously is that argument, right? What does structure of an argument or having good knowledge about structure of an argument do? It does two things. A, it gives you confidence with respect to what you are saying, and B, it makes your argument more presentable and more viable for the adjudicator. And why is that so important? Because two things again, right? When you are saying something, you have to say it with conviction so that that translates into that adjudicator, because at the end of the day all you are doing in that 1 hour exercise is trying to convince the judge कि यार मेरे को debate जिता दो. At that point in time, it's extremely important that your arguments be presented in such a manner that they are convincing enough for the judges to buy. Having said that, what are the three important constituents of a good argument? What I'm going to do here is, before I open the floor to you asking ki, what do you think are the constituents of a good structure of an argument, the reason I won't be going ahead and opening the floor for this question is simply this, right? You all might have different ideas with respect to what constitutes a good speech, but I think it's a fair assumption to make that that definition or that whatever you have in your mind will be different from what constitutes a good argument in a parliamentary debate, right? There are three major constituents of a good argument, or an argument in general in a parliamentary debate. First is the idea of that argument. Secondly is the analysis of that argument. And thirdly is the evidence you push for that argument. Don't look at this diagram right now. Okay? I'll come to that later. Right now, focus on these three things: idea, analysis, evidence. Now, note that these three things, in the order that they are written, show their importance in your speech, in your argument. That is to say, in your argument, your idea is the most important thing. Secondary to that is the analysis that you give to support your idea. And thirdly is that the evidence you provide for your argument to sound correct or to sound viable. Now, what does idea exactly mean, or what is idea in general all about? Simply putting, it's the why of your argument. That is to say, if the motion, for example, is this house regrets glorification of democracy, ठीक है, the idea behind your argument has to be ki why is this glorification so problematic that you're regretting it in the very first place. This idea is going to shape your entire argument for your four speeches that you're going to make: three constructive, one reply. After you are clear with what is the idea of what you are arguing for, you move on to analysis. What is analysis? Analysis is basically the amount of time and the method you adopt to make sure that what you are saying ties back to the idea that you have adopted or want to fulfill in that debate in the very first place. Simply speaking, if the motion is this house regrets the glorification of democracy, as far as the analysis is concerned, you focus on two major questions. One is how, and secondly, what. Why are these two questions important in analysis? Firstly, you're gonna have to go ahead and tell them that what is the value of the argument that you're pushing for in order to meet or fulfill the idea that you have adopted in the very first place. And secondly, how are the things that you are proposing gonna go ahead and have what kind of impact on the stakeholders that you have chosen to benefit in that particular debate. That is to say, if we talk about this particular motion, this house regrets glorification of democracy, in your analysis part, you're gonna have to go ahead and talk to people about why do you think regretting glorification of democracy is gonna go ahead and help solving the problems based on which you are regretting glorification of democracy in the very first place. Therefore, that is what analysis is. Thirdly, evidence. Now, many people shall go ahead and tell you that look, evidence is not that important. You can ignore or you can ignore including evidences in your speeches. It takes up time, yada 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 yada. However, as beginners, as freshers, इस बात की गांठ बांध लो कि evidence is extremely crucial in your debate, or as far as you guys are concerned right now, and also later, but majorly now, for two reasons again, right? And this is going to be something similar to what I've already told you. Evidence helps you in your debate or your argument or your speech in two ways. A, it gives you confidence about what you are saying, right? That is to say, if suppose the motion is this house regrets glorification of democracy, in that motion, if you are able to give evidences where in status quo or through real world examples, you have seen situations where glorification of democracies has led to certain issues or certain problems in the real world scenario, you will get greater confidence about what you are saying. But secondly, also the ability for adjuds to buy your argument increases. Why is that true? Because at any point in time, if your arguments are restricted to principle justification, the viscerality of that argument is not up to the mark. It's still possible that the adjuds might not get exactly what you're trying to say. But when you give evidence for your argument, you are able to clearly show to the adjudicator that, look, this is what exactly I'm talking about, and this is what I fear will happen if I don't regret glorification of democracy at this point in time. Okay. Before I move on, are there any questions? You can type it in the chat box. Okay. ठीक है. Okay. The last thing, as far as what constitutes an argument is concerned, is this graph that you're looking at, right? What does this exactly say? Now there are two axes on which you can weigh your argument and be sure about what you are saying is the right thing to say, or whether the direction you are going in is the right direction to go in the very first place. On the x-axis, I have written truth. That is to say, how true is your argument? Does it actually represent real life scenarios, or does this argument really make sense? And all that thing comes, or you measure on this axis. The second axis is the relevance. Now, just like any coordinate system, for your argument to be reasonably sound and for your argument to take you anywhere, it needs to be, your argument needs to be somewhere here. That is to say, on the 45-degree line between relevance and truth. What does it imply in simple terms? That it needs to be relevant to the discussion as well as true to the discussion. For example, if the motion is this house regrets glorification of democracy, and you're saying things like, oh, but Trump is bad. Okay, sure, Trump is bad. It's true, but what's the relevance of that argument or that evidence or that assertion in this debate? There is none, right? Therefore, at all points in time, the arguments that you make need to be successful or need to be contingent or need to score well on both these axes. That is to say, it needs to be relevant as well as true, right? Okay. Moving on, the next thing that we're going to talk to here about is the idea of rebuttals. Clarification: what is the difference between a rebuttal and a response? Any statement, if, for example, said in a debate, and you respond to that with analysis, that is to say, why you discredit that argument, why you don't believe in that statement, what is wrong with that statement. When you analyze that those things in response to that statement, it becomes a rebuttal. In the absence of analysis, however, that stands as a mere response that is not advisable in debates. Good adjudicators are never going to credit responses, they'll always look for analysis in your rebuttals. Simple भाषाओं में don't restrict your rebuttals to one liners and say कि अरे ये तो गलत है. अगर वो गलत है, spend some time in explaining as to why is that thing wrong and why is it something worth talking about or worth rebutting in the very first place. Okay. Now, when we have sort of a certain semblance of an idea of what a rebuttal looks like, what things do you necessarily target as far as rebuttals are concerned? In the same order as we talked about, as we talked to you in the last slide, I'm going to tell you as to what is the first thing that you can tackle and what is and in what order you should proceed. The first and the easiest thing to tackle, however not very advisable, is the evidence. For example, if you look at the example here, this house believes that the Me Too movement has failed working class women. Now, if in support of this argument, or if you're side government in this debate and you're talking about examples where this has where Dalit women have not had access to internet, or the Dalit women from working class section not having access to internet, and therefore they're not having access to this movement, or they're not being able to be part of the traction, etc., etc. If that is the evidence that you're tackling, that look, these are the evidences. Now the problem here is that your evidences can be easily broken down. That is to say, if you're supporting this motion and putting out examples that support your stance, there can be counter examples, even if minute in number, which the opposition can come up with and say, look, that but if your examples are true, then so are ours. At that point in time, what is extremely important here is that even if you're tackling their evidences, do not spend much time on tackling evidences, because the opposition can always come up with new examples and say, okay, theek hai, even if you have taken care of the last example we gave you, look, here is a new example that we have given you, tackle this. And you are stuck now in a loop of tackling evidences without even going to the analysis part of it, without even going to the ideas part of it. So that's so the first thing, the easiest thing but not so advisable thing to tackle: evidence. Second thing that you can tackle is the analysis. That is to say, you can talk about how there have been logical links missing in the analysis of the speaker who spoke before you, or your opposition team in general, where you can point out how there have been logical leaps made by the other team and how they have failed in making their case airtight, which Omer was talking about yesterday, right? For example, look at this example that I've given here. This house regrets the concept of muse in art forms. Now, what is the idea of having a muse in an art form? Any inspiration that an artist has while creating an art form is the muse for that artist in that particular piece of art. It can be someone when you write a song, it can be someone when you write poetry, it can be someone whose painting you have made. That is basically what muse is, right? Now, before I move on, uh, could you guys tell me what you think a good opposition to this motion might be? That is to say, the motion is this house regrets concept of muse in art forms. What do you think a good opposition to this is? Why do you not regret the concept of muse in art forms? The motion is this house regrets concept of muse in art forms. Give me a opposition case for this where you're not regretting the concept of muse in art forms. Wait, I'll type the motion here. The concept of muse in art forms is one with interesting visual and hence I'm more likely to pay attention. Okay, it brings out creative aspects in art forms. Okay, ठीक है. Right now you guys are thinking along the lines of creativity. Think थोड़ा along the lines of the muse themselves. People's life or cultures. Okay. Uh, the opposition might be that we cannot correct it to real life events and it won't be relatable to people in general. Okay, so then you should regret the concept of muse, right? I think you're speaking for the Gov case. But okay, for clarity, I'll repeat the idea of what a muse is in general. Muse is your inspiration when, as an artist, you create a piece of art. That is to say, if tomorrow I am writing a poetry about how beautiful Aditya Sareen is, then Aditya Sareen is the inspiration for me. He's the muse for me in that particular piece of poetry. Art is all about taking inspiration from one's surrounding and transforming it into art. The very idea of muse reflects the essence of art, demonizing, which is nothing but an okay, cool. Inspiration helps them to put out their heart in the very nice motion GGS quarters, octaves. Wait, why would you regret it then? Okay. ठीक है. So far you guys have covered two major ideas, a along the lines of creativity and secondly along the idea of artistic liberty. Sure, both are fair arguments to make. We'll talk about this when I address thematic rebuttals in general. But now tell me try to tell me the gov case for this. That is, why should you regret the concept of art, muse in art forms? This house regrets means that you don't like this idea of having muses or having the concept of muse in art form. That is to say, you want a world where people don't write poetry about Aditya Sareen. People write poetry for nature and stuff like that. They don't target people. They don't have individuals or having they don't have individuals in mind when they create art forms. I see a Katy Perry fan. Any gov argument here that why should you regret the concept of muse in art forms? Okay, let's not waste more time. I'll tell you what a good gov case could be here. The gov case here is simple, right? When you talk about having us, okay, the problem also is okay, muse creates unnatural standards. Exactly. That's the gov case here. The various art forms that artists try to paint, for example, generalizing, yeah, creating art within the experience of the person and a violation of privacy. Okay, might not doesn't muse in essence mean to corner deeply. Right. Okay. Khushi, Ansh, Karthik, you guys got it right. The a good gov case here is about standardization, is about setting standards in society now that every individual are expected to fulfill. That is to say, when Shakespeare talks about his lady love and how his lady love felt, what he felt about his lady love and the way his lady love made him feel a certain way, that is exactly what any reader of Shakespeare is now going to expect from the individual he wants to love in general. Or there are going to be these standards in society to which every individual now will be held accountable to. That is the idea behind which you want to go ahead and regret the concept of muse in art forms. Okay, now if that is true and that is the gov case in this motion, there was once a debate where the gov side went beyond that and said that look, these standards are unchangeable, these standards are set and they are not volatile, they are stagnant. Now, here is an opportunity for side opposition to sweep in and take this debate. How is that? Now, on opposition, what you can do is you can say that look, the times are changing. That is to say, if you're only talking about on-site government, about standards which Shakespeare said in general, today there is a greater scope for writers or poets or lyricists or musicians coming from different spaces of life and talking about different experiences and different inspirations in general. That is to say, more kinds of muses are being addressed, and therefore there is a propensity that the earlier set standards can be broken down when you allow people to talk about the different inspirations who are very different from the way the earlier standards existed. Therefore, what op is trying to say here is that look, we agree that there are certain standards which have been set in society by the virtue of you for the by the virtue of you having allowed the idea of muses to operate in the very first place. But now, because times are changing and there is greater avenue for people to express different types of inspirations, there is a scope for for the standards to be broken down or to be tackled. Here is where this rebuttal stands, and this is why I have taken this example. It's because just like Gov can argue that, look, sure, it sets some certain standards, for Gov to say that, oh my God, that is why we'll continue regretting it, is a logical leap. That is to say, they have assumed on their part that these standards can never be broken down. That is an assumption, that is a logical leap that side government has made in this debate. Here is your chance as opposition to come in and point it out as a rebuttal, to say that, look, here is an assumption that you have made. And in our case, however, there is a propensity that these things can change, and this is how it is going to happen. This is how you rebut an analysis, by pointing out logical leaps, by pointing out assumptions in general. Okay, I am assuming that's sort of clear. I'll take questions when I'm done. Once I'm done with this section, but the next thing is the I is tackling the idea in general. That is to say, you straight up go and say that, look, your idea is faulty, your idea is problematic in general. Look at this example here. I'll read it twice because it's a long motion. I'll also type it in the chat box. This house, as ASEAN, will mandate all trade relations of member nations to happen through ASEAN. I hope you guys know what ASEAN stands for. ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Now, think about the idea or the idea that a gov team will have when they construct their argument. Think about what is the need for this in the very first place. Think about why is this required, and give me some answers in the chat box. This house, as ASEAN, will mandate all trade relations of member nations to happen through ASEAN. That is to say, no member nation of ASEAN will be allowed to have trade relations with countries without without the involvement of ASEAN. That is to say, every trade relation will happen through ASEAN and will be monitored by ASEAN, by the council in general. Try to think about why is this required and what is the idea behind this proposal. It will make trade more organized, protects the interest of weak nations, making sort of an alliance. Okay, think more along these lines. It will create an environment of solidarity between the members and hence strengthening the relationship. It will promote fair trade practices. Okay. ASEAN hence will also become as strong as any other union like EU, which is constantly gaining effective use of collective resource protection in terms of fairness. Okay, cool. So the idea here is if I have to put it in a nutshell, the idea here is the idea of equitable bargaining chip, or the idea of solidarity between member nations. Okay, that's a fair idea to begin with from side government. It will lead to ASEAN countries being united, and the influence of outside powers will decline. Under the fixed set of rules of trading under ASEAN, it will blah 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 blah. It's necessary ASEAN unify to trade. Yeah, okay. Ansh writes, it's necessary for ASEAN members to unify in their trade so as to protect the small economies of ASEAN from neo-colonialistic attempts of economies like China and Asia. That's actually the argument that a Gov case would look like a year from now when you guys are debating this motion and you guys have to make a case. This is exactly the kind of premise from which you'll start making your case. So good job on that. Now here I'll tell you what an opposition is going to do here, right? Just give me a second. Yeah, okay. Here, what an opposition necessarily needs to tackle is that even if your bargaining chip increases when you go ahead and trade with countries like China and USA, because now you're a part of a collective union and stuff like that, does that really serve the purpose of equitable bargaining? Because now here the assumption is that Gov is making in this debate. I'm speaking on behalf of opposition here. The assumption on which Gov is modeling this debate is that there is equitable power dynamics within ASEAN, but that's not true. That is to say, even within ASEAN, there are different power dynamics between member nations. Even within ASEAN, there is one country more powerful and there is one country weaker than everybody else as far as negotiations within ASEAN are concerned. At that point in time, look at it this way: when a trade relation is forged between ASEAN and China, will the weaker country have a say in that? Will it obviously not cater to the more powerful countries within ASEAN at that point in time? Therefore, even if your idea is you want to increase equitable bargaining and stuff like that, does that improve your bargaining chip within that community in and of itself? Is it fair for that weaker country to not have an avenue to have a trade relationship outside that outside this union also? So here what I have done as an opposition is that I have tackled this idea of that, look, even if your idea is that you want to increase bargaining chip for those countries, is it necessarily true? Because the problem is that even within that union, there are skewed power dynamics. The reason I took up this example is because this is one motion where this is one motion which Riju Sayam and I had done in one of the rounds in one of the debates in a fresher year, and this was honestly one of the motions where we were this was the same motion. We were opposition there was a side government, and we were scared, right? Because we literally we are not IR experts. We literally don't know much about how these things happen, except that probably we do, but we can't put it into arguments and stuff like that. And these are things that you will also realize when you start debating and stuff. So the idea is that I'm tying this back to something Omer said yesterday, right? There are going to be times where you don't have an idea about the motion, where you are clueless for the entire case prep. But when you go ahead and you look at the why, what, and hows of the motion, your job becomes slightly easier. That is to say, probably because we were opposition, we had that leeway to listen to what the Gov case was going to be, and therefore have responses to that in with respect to what are the ideas that Gov is proposing and whether that's feasible. What is the analysis that PM is giving, whether that's feasible? What is the evidence that they are that we can estimate from the PM speech about that Gov case? Is that feasible? And therefore we were able to go ahead and tackle those issues. Therefore, the idea of giving you this session in general was to tell you that even if you have not enough knowledge about what the motion demands you to debate, getting into the idea, analysis, and evidence part of it, and looking for responses to these three things as far as opposition team is concerned, you can bring up things that can help your case, whether you are on proposition or opposition, right? Okay. ठीक है. before I move on, and we are done with rebuttals, any question, please type it in the chat box. Akshat, I think there is some issue at your end. I think the screen is visible. Can someone please confirm? Because I can see the screen on my other device. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Shivam, I will provide. We will provide you with these. Yes, we can. I didn't understand the muse thing. Okay. Please restrict your questions to this particular slide right now. If there is anything that I have said earlier and you have questions with respect to that, I can either take it at the end, or I can you can mention that in the forms. Okay. Make it difficult for an independent to sign a trade relation. Yeah, Khushi had written countries will make it difficult for independent countries like India to sign up trade relations with their other allies like USA if that does not help them on a whole. Yeah, yeah. Except what I said is an extension to that and is something that is more viable. Where obviously this is the idea which you will have as opposition, but when you analyze it further, you get something similar to what I talked about, and that's only gonna improve with time. So it's absolutely all right. The idea here is absolutely right. Can the opposition use US as our example and say that closing restriction has already failed and probably? Yeah, absolutely you can. I mean, you can probably someone wrote about EU, right? That how EU is also a great place because they're so powerful, they're so influential because they are together and stuff like that. You can literally go ahead and say that look, United Kingdom is walking out of the EU because of the kind of restriction it puts on their individual autonomy. So yeah, absolutely you can go ahead and do that. And also Ansh, just a suggestion, or and for people in general, when you give evidences, try to think of evidences which are very recent, because look at when you talk about the USSR thing, that's something which also had many other socio-economic political reasons attached to it breaking down and not necessarily restricted to this particular principle. However, if you talk about things more recent and more uh, connected with the motion, it's more viable and harder to fault. Hey, what kind of topics are given in a parliamentary debate? Okay. Yeah, that's true. Brexit would have made sense. Okay, what kind of topics are given in a parliamentary debate? Khushi, there are different themes in a parliamentary debate. There can be IR, international relations. There can be feminist movement. There can be Indian politics. There can be sports. There can be philosophy. There can be social movements, etc., etc., etc. Yeah, so it's really very diverse. And don't worry about that. Actually, we will give you a collected list, and we will go through those things later in the later sessions. But before that, just one more thing: explain most fatal blow, please. Okay, the reason why I have written most fatal blow under note for idea part of it is because look, uh, the best rebuttal to make in a debate and the way to increase your margin of victory. Don't get uncomfortable with the word margin of victory, because I'll explain it and you'll be very comfortable with it post that. But just the way you go ahead and win more comfortably in a debate is to go ahead and prove as to how redundant the opposition's case is with respect to yours. Here, when you tackle the very idea based on which their entire 4 minutes of speeches are premised, you necessarily have given them a blow from which they cannot recover. Because look at this: even if you can tackle I already told you, right? You can tackle evidences, you can rebut evidences, but evidence is something which can go either way. Opposition can come up in the next speech and say that okay, look, fair enough, that example was not right, take look at this example which might be a better example. You can talk about, you can challenge their analysis, but they can still come in and say okay, fair, but okay, here is another analysis through which we are fulfilling the end goal, or through which we are proposing what we are proposing. But when you attack their idea and prove that their idea is not the right idea to begin with, you have challenged their premise, and therefore you have given them no space whatsoever to come ahead and and have a fighting chance again. Therefore, it's said that challenging the idea based on which the other team's entire arguments or entire 4 minutes of speeches are based is the most fatal blow that you can offer to the other team. Bhaiya, sometimes during rebuttals, people use punching lines to move the audience. Does that affect the result? I'll come to tactics later, not right now. Really, not necessary. Please don't think about all those things right now. अभी वो सब मत सोचो. But ठीक है, before I'm done, before I move on from rebuttals, just look at this part, right? Thematic rebuttals, deterrence, precedent, etc. Now, what is thematization in general? If I am to give you an example, I have written deterrence, precedent, etc. I'll give you two examples to make it very clear as to what thematization is and why is thematization important. First of all, what is thematization? If you look at just today's chat, and when I asked you that why do you think that this house should regret the concept of muse or should not, there were different ideas which came about, right? Someone said that, oh, his creativity is being hampered. Someone said it says as an artist he has the right to take his inspiration and do stuff like that. And there were different statements along similar lines. Thematization is you listening to all those things, or you're looking at all those statements and trying to find out the common theme from that. If you noticed, after I read out those answers, I told you there are majorly two themes in the answers that I've got so far. One was the idea of creativity, and secondly, artistic autonomy. There, that is to say, if I have to make a response an, to another side which is talking about A, B, C, D, falana dinka things, but I recognize that A, B, C, D, falana dinka things are coming under the theme of one thing singularly or max two things. All I need to go ahead and do is that look, their themes are A and B. And therefore, if I'm able to take down A and B, their entire speech stands null and void. That is thematization. For example, if you remember the mock that you guys witnessed, the motion, what was the motion? The motion was this house believes that parents should have a license to be able, individuals should have a license to become parents, etc., etc. The ideas which are coming from the government, if you necessarily sat down and had to now thematize them, what are the major themes you think came from them? I'll open the floor for your answers here. What do you think were the major themes from themes which proposition pushed for in that mock debate that you witnessed? Anyone? Okay, okay. Just tell me if you need to understand thematization again. If parents need to pass through a basics of child labor, traumatic childhood, improvisation. Okay, I'll tell you what the if I just have to look at the answers that you have written right now, if I had to thematize just these things, I would say eligibility. That is to say, what side proposition wanted to push on their side in that particular debate was to tell you that look, we want these individuals to pass through a test of eligibility and prove their eligibility for XYZ reasons. And then they talked about why that eligibility is important, what is that eligibility going to lead to, and yada yada yada. But the major theme from their side, one of the major themes was eligibility. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Cool. What are some of the themes that you're going to come across in debates? You can come across themes like deterrence. You can come across themes like precedence. If I have to give you an example of deterrence, it would look like this. Suppose, I hope you guys know that Japan is one of the countries which very strongly stands for denuclearization. That is to say, it is one of the countries which is very strongly committed to removing or disincentivizing countries from engaging in nuclear warfare. So, as a part of that initiative, as a part of that resolution, they refrain from building nuclear arsenal for their own protection. So, there was this one of the motions which came up in one of the debates was this house believes that Japan should renuclearize. Okay, in that motion, the major theme from side government had to be the idea of deterrence. What is deterrence? Deterrence is basically you going ahead and doing something which will disincentivize the samne wala from doing something which may hurt you. How is this important in this particular motion? When I say that Japan should renuclearize, what it does is it sets a sense of fear along the minds of countries like DPRK and Iran, etc., who might think of Japan as a soft target. Therefore, they'll not want to mess with Japan anymore because now they realize that Japan can strike back, and that's going to be extremely harmful for them. What is the theme or slash principle in this argument? It's deterrence. ठीक है, दैट्स वन आइडिया. अगर मैं प्रेसिडेंस की बात करूं, प्रेसिडेंस इज बेसिकली यू सेटिंग अ नैरेटिव कि अगर ये हो सकता है तो यार ये भी सही है. It's saying something like for example, the session that Omer and Sareen conducted the other day on Discord, where the idea was that is it okay for you to go ahead and kill that individual who's asking you to kill them as a result of the continuous torture. A major argument there could be a precedent that if you go ahead and kill that individual, you are setting a narrative, you're setting a precedent in society that look, it's okay for you to go ahead and kill people, it's okay for you to go ahead and take another human's life. You are setting a precedent in society. Okay. So these are the basic these are the common themes that you'll come across in debates. Okay, Bhaiya, can you say this thematic part again? Because I lost the connection. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Thematization is you looking for arguments. मान लो मैं उस mock debate की बात करूं, I was DLO, right? So my job, if I had to go ahead and thematize their arguments and address them, because obviously I what I want to do is that I want to make my case tight. No, as opposition, I don't have the liberty like government की अरे मैं सिर्फ अपना case बताऊंगा, ऐसा तो होगा नहीं. I also have to rebut what government is saying. So at that point in time, in debate rooms mostly it's not only important to take down the other side, it's also very important to tell the edges what you have to offer, because that's also very important in a lot of debate rooms. So I want to spend as little time as possible on taking down their case so that I can spend more time on my case. A way to do that efficiently is to thematize arguments from that are coming from the other side. That is to say, you listen to arguments and collect them and try to find what is the common theme in those arguments, and you only spend your time trying to tackle that theme. That is to say, if you look at, I'm repeating for your sake, that is to say, if you look at the mock debate that we had, the major ideas which were coming from side proposition कि हम ये भी करेंगे, हम वो भी करेंगे, हम इसलिए करेंगे, हम वो भी करेंगे, was stemming from this one theme of eligibility, and them trying to tell you why this eligibility is so important, why this eligibility needs to be tested and needs to be put in place for whatever reason. That is thematization. What is the need of thematization? It makes your life easier, it saves your time, and it gives a good impression on the edges. It gives a sense that, oh, he's someone or she's someone who can identify what is going on in the debate, and therefore you have made that edges life much easier, because much easier for him/her to comprehend also. So that's the advantage of thematization. That's what thematization looks like. I'm assuming there is clarity on that now. I'll move on to the other thing. What are the common flaws with arguments that people make? It's not a very long list, but I'll just quickly go through them, and then I'll open the floor if you have questions with respect to any of the flaws that I'm talking to here about. The first flaw is assertion. What is an assertion? An assertion is a statement without analysis. That is to say, you come up in a debate and you say all Americans are liberals. Okay, sure. So how did you reach this conclusion? Because obviously there are people who in America who do not believe in this particular ideology, who identify themselves as conservatives. So you coming ahead and saying in the debate ki array all Americans are liberals, that's an assertion. You never tell me as to how you reach that conclusion. At no point in time am I saying this is wrong or this is right. All I'm saying is that the person who said all Americans are liberals, and because he said nothing else, he has not said anything why that is true. In the absence of that why, it is an assertion. The conclusion will not be bought because assertions are not credited in any debate room. You just can't come and say random stuff and go and think, अरे मैंने तो क्या बोला है मेरे को जिता देंगे. नहीं. Tell me जो आपने बोला है, why is that important, why is that true, why is that relevant to the debate, etc, etc. So that's basically assertion. You don't analyze stuff, that's an assertion. You are not getting credit for that. Okay. Secondly, contradiction. I think it's self-explanatory in nature. Your PM says something, your DPM says something else, or your LO says something, your DLO says something else. That's a contradiction. It's extremely harmful for you in a debate. Every smart edge is going to be very keen on identifying those things. They'll not miss out on those things. Any smart team, they're not going to miss out on those things. Therefore, how do you prepare against contradictions? You have consensus among yourselves before going into the debate room. You have elaborate talks, and you have clarity with respect to what all three of you have in mind and whether or not that's common. Because if that's not common, if you guys don't have clarity among yourselves, you are necessarily going to lead to a situation where you might give out concessions, you might give out contradictions, and that's not going to be good for you. Okay. Third thing, casual causation. That's basically another way of saying that it's an incomplete slash faulty analysis. For example, look at this example here. This house will tax Zara for flouting environmental laws. It was originally a very elaborate motion, but I've just picked out this part because that's the only relevant part that I need to explain for casual causation. Uh, the okay, here the reason I picked out this example is because I was recently in a debate room where the side government, which was saying that ये tax करो आप, they said कि when you put tax on these companies like Zara who flout environmental laws, what is going to do is that it's going to increase their costs, and therefore it's going to increase their prices in the market, and therefore people will no more be able to buy them. Therefore, the demand will go down, and therefore they'll go out of business, and therefore they'll reduce their output and stuff like that. And they said ki because now they'll reduce their output, therefore now less environmental laws are flouted, etc, etc. They said here there is a huge logical leap that they have made in this when you say just this in your government case, because it's very easy for opposition. And hear me out when I'm going to say this, right, and ask me if I wasn't clear. It's going to be extremely easy for the opposition to come out and point that, look, there are going to be two scenarios in a world like this. There is going to be a company like Zara who can afford this high tax, and there are going to be companies who cannot afford this high tax. For companies that can afford this high tax, it's not necessarily going to have any sort of drastic impact on the prices, which will drive the demands down. Therefore your policy doesn't really tackle that demographic. If your idea is that you want to tackle the demographic which can't afford this high tax, and therefore they'll have to increase their prices and stuff like that to meet this high cost, you can always go ahead and say that, look, these companies, all that they're going to do is that they're going to make their workers work even harder. They're going to pay them even less salary now, and they're going to meet that cost requirement out of cutting salaries of their workers. That is to say, they probably are not going to change the price, but they're going to change the kind of costs that they have within their corporation in the very first place. And that is how opposition can point that this particular problem that you set out to solve necessarily doesn't get solved, because at the end of the day, the people who are getting harmed are the poor workers who were absolutely at no fault, and your environment keeps getting violated even more because they're able to meet the cost of the tax because they're paying less salary, making the workers work more, etc, etc, and your environment keeps getting harmed and harmed and harmed. Therefore, you point out that there is a huge logical leap. There's a casual causation which has happened in that particular debate. So that's what casual causation is. It's simply pointing out ki yaar ye to this analysis doesn't make sense. Ye link nahi hai is analysis mein, and things on that. Then there is false dichotomy. Now this is pretty important here because with respect to what false dichotomy is, look at these two motions here, and now I'm going to be opening the floor for answers. This house will eat chocolate. Give me an opposition for this. Anything that comes to your mind. Just don't take it lightly. Just give me like valid oppositions to this. Okay. Sareen says diabetes. Fair. आगे बताओ. This house will eat chocolate. Cavities. Chocolate is immoral. Assertion. ठीक है. Extinction of cocoa. Okay. Sugar crash. I'm giving hints. ठीक है. Waste of money. Hmm. Increase in price of chocolate due to high demand. So obesity, high BP, it leads to hormonal imbalance. अच्छा, और बताओ. Chocolate is the only choice we have. We have ice cream in opposite. The snacks, they might get addicted to it, lead to hospital expenses. Okay, guys, I think I've got what I needed. I'll tell you why I stopped you here, right? Look at what uh, Hoimontik Gogoi said. I'm so sorry, bro, if I pronounced your name wrong. And what Snigdha said. One said chocolate is the choice only we have. We have ice cream in opposite. And Snigdha said loss of market for other snacks. Now here, this is this is still a tolerable argument to make. But why is it still problematic? The other arguments which came about, they were absolutely fine because they were dealing with the main concern of this motion. The main concern of this motion is why am I to eat chocolate or why am I not to eat chocolate? That is the main problem that you have to identify and you have to tackle in this debate. As opposition, if you say things like, oh, I won't eat chocolate because I'll eat ice cream, the gov can say, sure, do that, but also eat chocolate. Therefore, not only have we lost the debate because the gov has pointed out that both can happen together, that there doesn't lie a dichotomy there, but secondly, also because you haven't addressed the real problem. You haven't fulfilled your burden that you were supposed to fulfill in this particular regard. As opposition, therefore, be very careful that you don't get into false dichotomies. Don't say things like, Array, I'll not eat chocolate, I'll eat strawberries. Sure, go ahead and do that. But tell me, no, why is eating chocolate problematic? So, am I making sense here? No, sure, sure. Chocolate comes from press and design very much. Yeah, just read. Yeah. That's along the right line, but ठीक है. That's okay. But the point I'm trying to make here is with respect to dichotomies. कि बहुत बार there will be times where you yourself will create false dichotomies in your case. कि अरे and then you'll realize कि oh shit, it wasn't a binary. Or there will be scenarios where the other team makes it a binary and saying that look, oh, I won't do this because I'll do this. At that point in time, it's your inherent responsibility to go and point that out, saying look, you can do both. So this is a problem that a lot of people make, the idea of false dichotomy here. And look at the second notion, right? This is going to be an interesting question. I'm looking for good answers here. This house supports the use of cultural symbols by minority groups as legitimate forms of dissent in national protest. I'm going to write it here. Give me opposition to this. This house supports use of cultural symbols by minority groups as legitimate forms of dissent in national protest. Just to give you context, what does a cultural symbol by minority group look like in a national protest? It looks like something like you waving a green flag at an anti-CA NRC protest. मेरे को बताओ इसका ऑपोजिशन क्या है. The symbol may be wrongly under. Okay, okay, cool. Okay, Anshuman, that's a decent line to pick. I'll in the meantime I'll tell you Anshuman why and what is going to be the response to this from side government. Side government will say that look, that's not our burden because this is something which is extremely inexclusive. Radicals hate us already, so why should we not take pride, do something and then be hated instead of just being hated anyway? So that's something that that opposition, that government will say to this argument. Shift the locus of protest. Okay, cultural symbols may hurt other individuals feeling or internet like a group of fraction. It will create inequality in society. It will divert everyone from actual topic. This might promote communal dispute, hampers the very integrity of a country, and will encourage others to do the same. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. I'll I'll stop you guys here. I think I have increase the sentiment of heterogeneity in people, culture, something easy. Yeah, Ansh, you are correct. एक second रुक जा. Put the protesters in a box and not providing nuance. The symbols that represent the whole community would go on include even those who don't want to protest or happy with the government. Yeah, Dhairya, that's a really interesting argument, and yeah, that's a really good argument. I'll read that out. The symbols will represent the whole community and would go on to include even those who don't want to protest or are happy with the government. It's a good argument. Cultures and essentially do not exactly validate the arguments and needs, but they make them look like enemies to the state, divert people from in-hand issues, and target the sovereignty and ideals of the nation rather than its problem. Sense of hatred. Okay, okay, guys. Okay, I'll stop you there. I think I have a gist of what I needed. So except Dhairya, who said that look, it's gonna include, it's because it's representative of an entire community. It's gonna homogenize that protest into assuming that everyone within that community has a problem with that state policy which is being protested against. Apart from that argument, what majority of you are talking here about, thematically speaking, is the idea that look, your that it's going to promote heterogeneity. It's gonna shift the focus of the protest. It's gonna have bystanders. It's gonna have radicals, polarized bystanders, etc., etc. If I am to extend that idea into and say that look, oh, wait a second, can we use the example of college front? Yeah, you can. The reason why these arguments do make sense, and that is why I asked you to stop here, because if I had to link the progression that you guys are making, probably the next thing that you were gonna say is, oh, use Indian flag instead. Now there is where the problem could have been, and I did not really want you guys to reach that end, because there are a lot of debates where opposition says things like, oh, use Indian flags. No, here the debate becomes extremely one-sided in favor of government, because now look at this. What opposition has done in this debate is that what they have put their focus on instead is telling them, oh, but do this instead. No, but they haven't addressed the real issue here. The issue in hand here is not for an alternative. The issue in hand is not why can you not use Indian flag with, why should you not use Indian flag, but the question here is, why can, okay, I can use Indian, my national flag, but why should I not use my cultural symbol also? That is the burden of this debate, and side opposition has missed out and led the edges and led the room into a false dichotomy. This debate is not supposed to happen in a binary. This debate is not a binary between, oh, whether you should use national flags or cultural flags. That is not the debate. The debate assumes that even if I'm using my national symbol already, why is it right or wrong to use that cultural symbol also? Therefore, all the other things that you said do make sense. Also, it makes the cultural symbol. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, right? These arguments are the right examples. They are the right way to lead, and I'm really happy that you caught on to it, because a common mistake here to make is to say things like, oh, but use Indian flag. No, that is not the debate, and I'm glad you guys did not venture into that. By the way, really, really interesting ideas. I'm really happy. I think all of us are reading this right now. So I think you guys have a clear idea with respect to false dichotomies and stuff like that. So I'll move on to what is strawmanning in general. It's very simply said in layman terms. It's response to made up arguments. It's simply that, right? Yeah, it's a very it's a very ignorant, it's a very cheap tactic, it's a very unethical tactic to adopt to win debates. It is unfortunately used by some teams even now, but it's really looked down upon, it's frowned upon, and we really hope that you guys don't do this when you start debating and stuff. I'll give you an example of straw manning. So if you guys remember the mock debate that we had, right, in that particular debate, if you remember the chats, Matthew wrote somewhere, "Stop strawmanning us." What did he exactly mean by that? So the idea was that when you strawman someone, as any side, suppose I'm strawmanning the case of side government and opposition, what I'm essentially doing is that I realize that there is not a lot for me to rebut, or probably I'm not able to rebut a lot of things in Gov case. So probably what I can do is I can put words into Gov's mouth and try to rebut that. Now, that is something which becomes extremely problematic in debates because for two reasons. A, smart edges will catch you because when I'm going to explain to you how edging looks like, you will realize that edges write down everything. Not everything verbatim, but major सारा चीजें concession, contradiction, क्या हो रहा है debate में, क्या theme है, क्या idea फलान, they write everything. So obviously when you're trying to say something, they'll refer to the sheets, no, कि अगर ये सच में इन्होंने बोला या नहीं बोला है, and they say कि इन्होंने नहीं बोला है, then obviously they are going to penalize you for it. Plus, there are going to be smart teams also. No, they are going to come and say, look, we never said that. And when the edges and that team are on the same page, you not only do you lose out, but it's also something extremely unfair for you to participate in the very first place also. So refrain from that in general. So I'll repeat what are the common flaws we talked about here. Assertion, contradiction, casual causation, false dichotomy, and strawman. अगर किसी को कोई डाउट है इसमें, इनमें से किसी में भी you don't have clarity with respect to what are these flaws, what do these flaws actually mean, please ask right now in the chat box. False dichotomy with another example, please. Okay, ठीक है, I'll tell you. Okay. This house prefers world A over world B. Suppose in a motion you have been given some context with respect to what does world A look like, and you have been given some context with respect to what does world B look like, and the motion is this house prefers world A over world B. Do you think there is a dichotomy in this debate? Just type yes or no. YN also works. Akshat says yes. Anyone else, do you guys think there is a dichotomy here? Is there a binary here? Yes, Khushi says yes. There is a binary here, but there's a world C. No, exactly, right? That's the issue here. uh when the debate, when do you know that there is a clear binary in the debate? When the motion says so. When the motion says that, look, You are preferring one word over the other. As far as your debate is concerned, as proposition, as opposition, as adjudicator, jo bhi, you have to operate with the assumption that there are only these two words and only one of these two words is worth living in. One side is going to defend world A, the second side is going to defend world B. There is a clear binary here. There is no world C because the motion explicitly states that this house prefers world A over world B. Therefore, there is a clear binary here. If I am to explain a motion where there is no clear binary, but it might lead to a false dichotomy being created, here's a motion, hear me out. I'll also type it in the chat box. This house believes that self care should also include self indulgence. Let me tell you what self care is, what is self indulgence, and then we can have like a couple of answers coming in. It's a really interesting motion. When you talk about self care, you talk about you taking care of yourself with respect to an endeavor to keep growing. That is to say, मैं डिबेट करा, मैं हार गया, मैं घर जाऊंगा, मैं 10 वीडियो देखूंगा क्योंकि आई वांट टू इम्प्रूव एज अ डिबेटर. आई एम टेकिंग केयर ऑफ माई सेल्फ by trying to constantly improve in my life because there is a problem that I have to meet, and if I'm not going to improve, I cannot take care of that problem. That problem is going to keep causing me more and more problem. Therefore, self care is self taking care of yourself through constant effort to grow and improve. What does self indulgence mean? Self indulgence is simply कि यार मैं हार गया, कोई बात नहीं यार, देखेंगे, मैं कोई बात नहीं यार, आई लेट्स नॉट बी टू हार्ड ऑन माई सेल्फ हियर, आई गेव माई बेस्ट यार, ठीक है ना यार, नेक्स्ट डिबेट तो आएगा, तब आराम से प्रेप कर लेंगे, तब आराम से सीख लेंगे. दैट इज टू से यू एक्सेप्ट योर सेल्फ एज हु यू आर नॉट इन अ परस्यूट ऑफ constant evolution or constant improvement. That is you uphold and celebrate yourself the way you are as an individual. Now, let me read out the motion again. This house believes that self care should include self indulgence. Just through a yes or no, pehle, tell me if this is a binary or not. That is to say, is there a is there a dichotomy in this motion or not? Akshat says there is not a binary here. Ananya says there is not a binary here. या शिवम, आई एम नॉट टेकिंग लाइक आंसर्स अभी बस मेरे को बताओ कि ये तुमको क्या लगता है, ये बाइनरी है, ये डाइकोटमी है इस मोशन में या नहीं है? सृष्टि सेज यस. सृष्टि, could you please elaborate as to why you think there is a binary in this debate?
Yeah, Bhaiya, as you explained now, what is self care? That improving yourself continuously, but in self indulgence, you want to be like that you are today, and
Okay, ठीक है.
you want to be
सृष्टि,
careless.
ओके सृष्टि, एक बार मोशन पढ़ो फिर से. क्या इसमें कहीं भी ऐसा लिखा है कि दिस हाउस बिलीव्स दैट सेल्फ केयर इज बेटर देन सेल्फ इंडल्जेंस? नहीं लिखा है. दैट इज टू से no, there is not a dichotomy in this debate. If you go into this debate saying ki look, self care and self indulgence can't go hand in hand, you lose this debate straight away, because that is not what this debate is. You have spent your time on something extremely different from what you were expected to defend in this particular debate. यहाँ पे you have to debate on whether or not you think कि self indulgence should be a part of self care. That is to say कि आज अगर मैं debate हार गया तो what kind of world do I want? अगर सिर्फ self care is self care, then I go back home and I start looking up videos in order to improve. Self indulgence part of self care is that I go back home, order food from Swiggy, relax and sleep nicely for a night, wake up after 2 days, give myself some healing time, and after 2 days I start to think about कि यार क्या problem है and try to bring a solution to that. That is what the debate is. Whether you want कि नहीं यार कोई आराम नहीं, कुछ नहीं, काम करो, मेरे को प्रॉब्लम हटाना है, एंड द अदर वर्ल्ड इज कि ठीक है यार, केयर थोड़ा अपना भी जतन पतन करते हैं, फिर we'll look into the problem and try to evolve and find a solution. That is the debate. The debate is not कि अरे आराम कर रहे तो आराम ही करे जा रहे, मेहनत करे तो मेहनत ही करे जा रहे. Therefore, there is no dichotomy in this debate. In this debate, had you had any team gone ahead and said, ki, look, self care and self indulgence can't go hand in hand, then it would have been a case of uh, yeah, hi. I think I lost connection. Just give me a second. Mm, okay. ठीक है. So as I was saying, तो हाँ, so there is no dichotomy here. अगर किसी ने यहाँ पे dichotomy create करने का कोशिश किया होता, that would have been a false dichotomy. I hope there is better clarity with respect to false dichotomy now. A thumb rule or a simple thing from which you can assess whether or not there is a dichotomy which is supposed to exist in this debate, you have to look at the motion. The motion will make it extremely, extremely clear to you if at all there is a binary. If not, don't do that. Just just look at what the debate motion demands. So okay, there was someone who asked for what straw manning means. Straw manning is basically me making up an argument and trying to break that. For example, if suppose Sareen and I are debating about Big Boss is bad, and Sareen says कि यार Big Boss is bad because it's all scripted, and my rebuttal to that is कि यार देख नहीं यार Big Boss अच्छा है, तूने ऐसे कैसे बोल दिया कि Big Boss time consuming है. Sareen will be like, क्या? I never said that's my reason for not liking it. Do you get what I'm trying to say here? What I have done is that I have created an argument from my end in order to just मतलब just taking down Sareen for the sake of it. मैंने उसने जो बोला मैंने वो एड्रेस करा ही नहीं, मैंने खुद ही से कुछ उसके साइड से आर्गुमेंट बना दिया और मैं उसी को रिबर्ट कर रहा हूँ. आई थिंक इससे क्लियर करना थोड़ा मुश्किल होगा. Okay, I thank you for getting it now. I hope I can move on to the last thing as far as structure of arguments are concerned, and then we can have a more elaborate discussion on adjudication in general. Okay, the last thing here is the idea of even if. What is an even if, right? अच्छा अच्छा मेरे को एक बात बताओ. Look at this motion. This house will ban advertising CSR funds. ठीक है. Tell me what is a good gov case in this. Also, while you guys are thinking, I'll be back in a minute. आप लोग सोचो. Hello, am I audible? Guys, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
Cool, cool. Hmm. CSR is a basic address given the police address government. Okay. Yes, you are. ठीक है. Akshat has written something. I'm looking for arguments in favor of this motion कि gov इसमें क्या बोलेगा. और थोड़ा सोचो. ठीक है. That's an interesting way to look at it. Akshat, in the meantime, if I am to ask, just you can respond in the chat box. कि even if people are getting the idea that company is doing it out of its free will, why is it bad? Anyone else for this house will ban advertising CSR funds? Do you need me to explain what a CSR fund is? I'll do that for you. You can follow the steps I talked about. You can try to think about कि क्या problem है, ये क्यों बोल रहे suddenly ऐसा. Try to think about on those lines. Advertising CSR funds create a disparity with companies who cannot possibly contribute because of the lack of decent economic status. Okay, ठीक है. Let's wait for like one more answer and then I'll tell you what exactly I was looking for. Okay, chalo, ठीक है. A company exists because a company might नहीं एक second. A company exists because it exploits natural resources, makes it's not supposed to see as a lucrative thing. Okay, cool. Company can manipulate the amount of CSF in the balance sheet to get tax exemption, may not provide a bit of amounts in balance sheet. ठीक है. Okay. If I am to thematize the answers I got here, yeah, Snigdha just hit jackpot. That's the argument I was looking for. So yeah, you guys can stop sending more answers here. I'll tell you why Snigdha's answer is most important here. The other answers which you guys wrote, the major idea that we get from there is that, oh look, these companies will send out a narrative. They'll try to improve their image, and it will only lead to them getting a benefit out of it and stuff like that. The rebuttal or response to that is ki, oh, then it's great. No, because if companies through advertising CSR are able to create a good brand image for themselves, then too it's good, because now they have an incentive to do even more CSR funding, and that's only necessarily going to help you as a government to get more funds to conduct the CSR projects in and of itself. Now, for the sake of that brand image, they are fighting among themselves, and they are fueling more and more and more and more and more of money. So that's a good thing. That's a response to that. However, if you look at what Snigdha says, advertising CSR funds gives companies a good name and people ignore the harms they might be causing to nature. Not just that, but simply look at this. A Unilever, when it goes ahead and funds a Black Lives Matter protest, or it goes ahead and gives them funding, what it necessarily does, it's that it creates an atmosphere where it is harder for people to go ahead and criticize Unilever for the kind of racist exploitation that they conduct within their working space themselves. That is to say, when these companies are allowed to go ahead and propagate कि अरे हम कितने अच्छे हैं, the kind of opposition that you can make to them is even more difficult, because now you are allowing them to clean their image and make it more difficult for dissentees in general to go ahead and put up a front against them. That is the basic understanding for this. Now look at, okay, now why have I used it in the even if wala thing? What is an even if, first of all? And even if is simply this, right? Okay, when you are trying to oppose the things that one team is saying in a debate, what you necessarily and very naturally we tend to look at is कि यार ये गलत बोल रहा है, ये गलत कैसे बोल रहा है, ये कैसे पता लगाऊं मैं, ये अगर मैंने प्रूव कर दिया मैं जीत जाऊंगा. So we spend a lot of time in trying to analyze ki where are they going wrong, why exactly, how are they saying things that don't make sense. However, there is this trick called even if argumentation, in which you take a back seat and you try to listen what this side is actually saying, and try to think that even if ये जो बोल रहा है सही बोल रहा है, does it necessarily help the idea with which they are saying this. That is to say, if I am to talk about with respect to this particular motion, even if the idea is that you want to hold these companies accountable by not allowing them to clean up their image and stuff like that, is your idea being completely fulfilled by banning advertisement of CSR funds? That is an even if argumentation. What is a good opposition to this, and how does even if work out here? As opposition, what you say is ki, okay, ठीक है, even if this idea is true, it the kind of thing that you're trying to do doesn't really solve the purpose that you have, because what can still happen is that even if this company, that is to say Unilever is not able to go ahead and show to the world what kind of funding they are doing, Black Lives Matter as a movement or any institution which are receiving the funding can still go ahead and do that propagation of advertisement for that company. Therefore, you can go ahead and say that even if your principle is correct, the kind of methodology you're trying to use here doesn't serve your full purpose, because there is still a chance that that goodwill can still happen. The goodwill can still be propagated through the people who are receiving that funds. Your policy doesn't stop the receivers from going ahead and conducting this goodwill campaign. This is what, and if an opposition runs, it becomes extremely difficult for government to go ahead and continue in this debate. Probably they will. I'm not really talking about that. What I'm simply trying to tell you here is that now as an opposition, you look at the idea of said government and you look at the analysis that they're proposing. A good debater will always try to see if the analysis that the other team is pushing for is helping the idea that that team is trying to fulfill. If not, that good debater will point that out and say that even if we don't have a case at all, because it's not a binary, because it's not a dichotomy here, you have failed to show with your analysis how your analysis is helping your idea, and therefore you don't deserve to win this debate. So automatically we win this debate. That's something how that is how even if argumentation works. If there is any doubt तो मेरे को बताओ, मैं और अच्छे से फिर समझाने का कोशिश करूंगा. A cigarette or tobacco company may improve their image by CSR, but they ain't doing no good to people by saying, okay, also it takes away much needed funds for good causes. Khushi, how? It takes away those much needed funds. How is that true? CSR funding तो अच्छे कामों के लिए ही होता है ना, मतलब what is it taking away from? Would you please explain even if with a different example? Okay, let me think of an example. ठीक है, ज़ारा वाला एग्जाम्पल ही लेते हैं. वहाँ पे आई टोल्ड यू हाउ कि उनका एनालिसिस कैसे फॉल्टी था, इफ यू रिमेंबर, राइट. इन द सेम मोशन आई कैन से कि ओके ठीक है, इवन इफ योर आइडिया इज कि अरे we want to stop environmental degradation and stuff like that, does your proposal really solve the purpose? And you can point out that no, that doesn't really happen, because you can mitigate that cost and you can take care of that tax that you are having to pay by making your workers work more and stuff like that. Therefore, environmental degradation doesn't really stop. You are still paying it off, and that degradation keeps on happening. So again, the idea to go ahead and perfect an even if argument is to look at the idea that the other team is proposing, look at the analysis that they are proposing, and compare them to. if they are working perfectly in coordination with each other, then you can't really use this. But if there is at all any fallacy or any gap between the two, you can always come out and say that, look, sure, even if your idea is true, your analysis ain't helping your case, buddy. So आप हार गए, जाओ. uh, would you please explain? Okay, yeah, the ban stops the funds. No, it stops advertising, I guess, not funds. Yeah, it stops advertising. It doesn't stop the funding. There will still be this motion assumes that companies will still be expected to pay a certain amount of fraction, the mandated fraction, to as CSR funds, but they won't be able to advertise it. Okay, I think there is better clarity with respect to even if argumentation is concerned. So we are done with structure of an argument part. Uh, Now coming on to adjudication. But before I move on to adjudication, any doubt you have with respect to arguments or the things that I talked to you about arguments, please tell me. Also, it's very natural if you have questions here. These are not things that uh, are easily comprehensible. So these things look really scary in theory. So agar if there is at all anything, please let me know. Okay, so I'll assume there is some sort of clarity. Yeah. Omer Bhaiya said examples don't provide much base. Yeah, absolutely right. Therefore, that is exactly why I told you the order of priority of the three things, of the three constituents of an argument. I told you, right, that the most important thing in your argument is your idea. The second most important thing in your idea, in your argument, is the analysis that you push, that you give for it. And it's the last important thing is evidence. What evidence or example does is that it strengthens your idea, it strengthens your analysis, but it doesn't happen the other way around. That is to say, you can't build a case around an example, because that because if I am if suppose you have picked out an example and you have tried to बैक ट्रेस एंड से कि अच्छा ये एग्जांपल है, इसका ये एनालिसिस बैठ रहा है, इससे मैं ये आइडिया बना लेता हूँ, चलो ये केस रन करते हैं. Therefore, understand what you have done. Your entire argumentation is premised on an example. मान लो वो गलत है, तो क्या करोगे? सामने वाली टीम ने आके बोल दिया यार ये तो गलत है. I'll give you a very 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 clear example here. ठीक है. This house will this house believes that Japan should renuclearize वाले एग्जाम्पल में मान ले मुझे केस बनाना है इसका, और मैंने बोला कि यार इसका क्या केस बनेगा. अच्छा, एक मुझे ये पता है कि जापान अपने मिलिट्री डिफेंस वगैरह के लिए यूएस के साथ अलायंस में है. दैट इज यूएस इज ऑब्लिगेटेड टू कम टू जापान्स एड व्हेनेवर इट नीड्स फॉर मिलिट्री रिक्वायरमेंट्स. तो मुझे ये पता है, और मुझे पता है कि यार ये डोनाल्ड ट्रम्प बहुत सारे ट्रीटी वीटी से निकल रहा था. सो इसका कोई ठिकाना नहीं अमेरिका का. ये लोग अपना फॉरेन पॉलिसी इनका बड़ा शेकी सा है, इन पे ट्रस्ट नहीं कर सकते हम. तो ये मेरा एग्जाम्पल मुझे पता है. अच्छा यार ये तो सही एग्जाम्पल मिल गया, चलो इसी पे केस बनाते. यही मेरा आइडिया होगा अब कि यार अमेरिका ट्रस्टवर्दी अलाई नहीं है, तो इसलिए हम रीन्यूक्लियराइज करेंगे जापान को ताकि इट्स सेल्फ रिलायंट. अगर मैं ये केस बना के जाता हूँ डिबेट करने, फर्स्ट स्पीच में ऑपोजिशन का बंदा आएगा, वो बोलेगा नहीं ऐसा तो नहीं है, चलो डोनाल्ड ट्रम्प जैसा भी था वैसा था. Now Joe Biden is back and he's back with popular mandates. People have given him votes because they expect him to rejoin all those treaties, rejoin all those bodies, and reassociate with allies. So therefore, even if that was a period of skepticism, we have certain amount of reliance on America back because this individual is back and that individual you had a concern about is out. At that point in time, in one speech, उन्होंने तुम्हारा पूरा केस खत्म कर दिया है. एंड नाउ यू हैव नो रूम टू एस्केप बिकॉज तुम्हारा पूरा जो तुमने केस बनाया था, इट वाज कंटिंजेंट ऑन दैट वन एग्जांपल. आई थिंक आई एम एबल टू मेक अ पॉइंट हियर दैट कभी आप एग्जांपल्स पे केस मत बनाओ. it's a very very risky line approach to take. ठीक है. Okay, let's move on to adjudication now. Uh, so I'll talk to you about here major three things. First of all, who is an adjudicator slash adjudicator कोई बोलता नहीं है, adjudication कोई बोलता नहीं है, हम adj बोलते हैं और adging बोलते हैं. तो get familiar with that lingo. ठीक है. Who is an ad slash adjudicator? जो आपका डिबेट जज कर रहा है. It's as simply as put in that, but that is not the answer to who is an adjudicator. When I say who is an adjudicator, what I mean is that an adjudicator or an adj is an individual who has the average smartness level of a newspaper reading individual. इसका साधारण भाषा में ये मतलब है कि जो मेरा डिबेट जज कर रहा है उसमें बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग एंड स्मार्टनेस लेवल है to interpret things, to comprehend things, and to credit things where they are required. Nobody expects you in as an adj to know everything. Similarly, no one's going to tolerate you if you know nothing. That is to say, if the debate is if this house as the Democratic Party will choose a centrist over a leftist, and the side proposing this is saying ki, look, Joe Biden is so successful, Joe Biden has been a Democrat and has gained falana dinka shit, and the ad says ki, yaar, I did not give you this debate because I don't know who Joe Biden is, then sorry, you are in the wrong field, because these are very basic minimum things that you are expected to be familiar with. No bhi chodo, you are expected to be familiar with. You as an adjudicator at the end of the day then is going to get a zero in that round and probably not proceed to the next round. What I'm trying to say here is that you are not expected to be an expert on world affairs or feminist movement or international or Indian politics, but you need to have a general understanding of what is happening around the world and basic things like that. That is who an adj is, who an adjudicator is. What is adjudication slash adging? साधारण भाषा में फिर से बोलूंगा, जो आपने उस दिन करा, ओनली उसके साथ आपको क्या करना था कि यू वर सपोज और यू आर एक्सपेक्टेड टू राइट डाउन एवरीथिंग दैट वाज बीइंग टॉक्ड अबाउट. देयर इज अ वेरी सिंपल प्रोसेस टू एजिंग. ठीक है, you sit in a room with a piece of paper or your laptop or whatever you are comfortable with noting down things on, and you note down things what are talked about. आपने एक PM ने क्या बोला लिख लिया, LO ने क्या बोला लिख लिया, ऐसे ही सारे स्पीचेस के आपने लिख लिए. And at the end of the debate, what you are expected to do is to compare the matter, थीमेटाइज. आप यू आर एक्सपेक्टेड टू थीमेटाइज. सबसे ज्यादा थीमेटाइजेशन की एक्सपेक्टेशन एड से होती है, क्योंकि एट द एंड ऑफ द डे एज एन एडजुडिकेटर यू हैव टू कम एंड टेल द टीम्स कि कौन जीता और क्यों जीता. एंड नो टीम इज इंटरेस्टेड इन नोइंग कि पूरा डिबेट में क्या हुआ. दे वर देयर, दे नो पूरे डिबेट में क्या हुआ, बट द रीजन दैट यू हैव कम देयर इज टू टेल देम कि यार थीमेटिकली स्पीकिंग डिबेट में क्या हुआ, बिकॉज प्रॉब्ली दैट्स समथिंग दे डिड नॉट spend much time in. तो you are expected to thematize things and tell them कि यार देख डिबेट में मोटा मोटा ये हुआ ये हुआ ये हुआ. So the process is you listen to the debate, you write down everything is what's happened. After that you thematize the debate कि यार गव से ये थीम आए, ऑप से ये थीम आए, ये क्लैश ये जीता, वो क्लैश वो जीता, बट मोशन के डिमांड के हिसाब से ये जो डिबेट है वो ये जीतता है और ये रीजन के वजह से जीतता है. That is the simple process or simple thing called what adging is or what is adjudication. Now it can come off as cliche कि expectation from adj क्या है, but I think as beginners it's the best if you keep note of these things. Screenshot ले लो, हर दिन देखना adj करने से पहले. I can't put more stress on this. There are three things which you have to do or be in order to be a fair adj, which is extremely important. A, you have to be extremely unbiased. When I say unbiased, I don't mean ki you not being biased towards one team. No. When I say unbiased, I mean you being detached from your set of preconceived notions. यार ये डिबेट तो ऐसे होना है, यार ये डिबेट में तो गवी जीतेगी, यार ये डिबेट में तो ऑप ही जीतेगी. इन सब से you have to be detached and be unbiased as a person who doesn't know what this debate is. You have to assume that you don't know what this debate is going to be. You have to assume that you don't know how this debate is supposed to be, and you listen to what is happening, and you look at your paper and you say ki ha yaar isme to ye jeeta hai because my paper says this. That is what I mean when I say you have to be unbiased. Second, you have to be honest. अभी मतलब इसका जरूरत, what do I say and how do I say more than simply stating कि there are two teams who have spoken at length for 1 hour, only having a simple expectation from you कि you credit them for the things that they deserve to be credited for. If you are not honest, I think it's unethical, but also at a practical level, it's very evident from your edge feedback. And edge feedback is when you come back into the room and you tell teams कि यार ये जीता या वो जीता and the reasons, and you address them basically. Now I'll tell you a very a recent example with respect to. एक second रुक जा. Yeah, okay. I'll tell you a very recent, not a very recent incident, but something that had a deep impact on us. During one of our fresher tournaments, there was this one particular debate where we very strongly felt that we had outdone the other side, and there were three judges in the room, and one of the judges, she was someone who had edged us previously as well, and we hadn't agreed to her verdict on those days when she had edged us previously. She was there in this room again, and we went out. And when we came back, usually the edges collectively are allowed max 15 to 20 minutes to prepare their edge feedback and come back. That day we waited outside like for 40-45 minutes, and when we came back, we realized that we had lost the debate on a dissent. A dissent is basically two edges giving it to one side and one edge giving it to the other. Obviously, the side with more edges giving it to them wins the debate, but it's called a dissent scenario. And so a dissent had happened and we had lost the debate on a 2-1 split. When this particular edge, which I talked about, came into the room, through her feedback, it was evident that she knew that she had made a blunder, and it was very evident, and it was not a nice feeling to be in that room. I'm sure not for her, not for us. So I implore you guys to be really honest with respect to when you edge or do things like that. And thirdly, attentive, right? Because there are going to be things which happen in the debate and which might be extremely crucial in the debate. But when you come into the feedback, because you are not attentive, you don't mention them, and the other team is like, you dude, that was the most important thing in the debate, and that is based on which we had to win this debate, and you didn't listen. How is that possible? So you have to be really, really attentive to what all is happening in the room for that half an hour, 1 hour, whatever it is. So yeah, these are the basic three things which are expected from you as an edge. Post that. No, bro. There were no actions taken against this. It can't be. But those are things that you really don't need to bother right now. I'm just telling you why you need to be honest and unbiased and stuff like that. Okay. I'll spend the rest of the time in trying to tell you what are the do's and don'ts of edging. So always make it a point to have prior clarity about one, the debate / trade-off demanded by motion. Okay. What does this mean? This basically means कि what is this debate about? This is something that you should, as an adjudicator, have a clear understanding about. Okay. The example I've written here is that this house believes art should be seen as inherently democratic. I'll tell you the context to this. The context to this is very simple. What does democratic art form mean? In simple terms, it means subjective. That is to say, that when you say this house believes that art should be seen as inherently democratic, you mean that your art form should be extremely subjective. That whoever consumes that piece of art should be free to have an opinion on what that art represents. The the binary in this debate, or the alternate universe in this debate, is a world where every art form has a definitive meaning. That is, there is an objective way of looking at that art, there is an objective interpretation of that art. That is to say, uh, if I have made a song, I have written a song, and the lyrics are really abrupt, one world is one where art is seen as inherently democratic, and therefore whoever consumes my song, whoever listens to my song, is free to make their opinion कि हाँ यार तुम्हें लग रहा है ऐसा मतलब है, तुम्हें लग रहा है वैसा मतलब है, ठीक है खुश रहो. Another world is कि I have written my song and I've also told exactly what my song represents, what my song is about, etc., etc., etc. And whatever you guys have an opinion about it is fair. तुमको लग रहा है तो लगे, but this is the right interpretation of it. That is to say, objectivity versus subjectivity. If art is seen as inherently democratic, then you uphold subjectivity of opinions. If art is not seen as inherently democratic, then you uphold objectivity. In this debate, this is something you as an adjudicator have clarity about. Why am I stressing on this? I once edged a room where this was being debated, and one side was talking about exactly what this motion is. They were opposing the motion, and they were saying things like, "Oh, look, if there is subjectivity allowed, then people in majority will always have an upper hand in interpretations. They'll always get to interpret. They'll have more resources to interpret and make sure that their interpretation is set as the standard interpretation and all those things." The other side was expected to come up and say, "Look, no, subjective hona chahiye, falana dinka." What they ended up doing, however, is that they took the word democratic literally. That is to say, they came and said, look, art needs to be seen as inherently democratic so that state oppressive regimes or oppressive regimes cannot take it down. And they focused on that art form being seen as democratic or non-democratic, in not in the terms in which they were meant to be taken in. So as an adjudicator, you need to be very clear with respect to what is the trade-off or what is the debate expected from that motion. Secondly, what you have to have clarity about is what is the motion type. Is this a this house will motion? Is this a this house believes that motion, etc., etc., etc.? I think Omid talked to you about in depth. If not, we'll be talking about it in depth in later motions also. I have taken a very simple example of of two types of motions with the similar connotation, but just the type I have changed. Just look at this. This house believes that there should be creation of a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries. This house will create a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries. Okay, so just read that again and I'll tell you what's the difference. This house believes that there should be creation of a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries. This house will create a separate living space for disenfranchised citizens of respective countries. When I look at the first motion, this house believes that whenever you look at a THBT motion, note and remember that in a debate like this, all you're supposed to do is to talk things at a principle level. That is to say, you go ahead and say कि तुम्हें ऐसा लगता क्यों है, ऐसा क्यों होना चाहिए और ऐसा क्यों नहीं होना चाहिए. That is the extent of what the debate should be. On the other hand, the second one, this house will create. Whenever there is a will motion, W motion, note कि mechanics become extremely important. That is to say, opposition can come up and say कि look, ऐसा country बनाना impossible है. ऐसा country का economy क्या होगा? ऐसे country के ruling party में कौन आएगा? ऐसे country का government कौन होगा? These are concerns which an opposition can raise in a this house will that motion, because mechanization becomes important in a this house will motion. In a this house believe that motion, no opposition can come up and say कि अरे यार इस country का economy क्या होगा. अगर वो ये कर रहा है तो ये बहुत गलत है. It's and an adjudicator will never credit mechanical questions in a this house believes that motion. So this is a basic difference between you having clarity with respect to what kind of motion there is, so that you don't end up crediting wrong things or missing out on right things. Okay. Third thing you have to have a clarity about is dichotomy or binary. We have talked about this in great depth कि binary है या नहीं है, teams को पता होना नहीं होना, that is different, but you also as an edge must be aware कि यार इस debate में binary है या नहीं है, so that again you don't end up making mistakes with respect to verdicts or things like that. Then always make it a point to check speaker role fulfillment. Omer has talked to you in depth about what are the different speaker roles. PM का क्या काम है, DPM का क्या काम है, विप्स का क्या काम है, रिप्लाई स्पीकर्स का क्या काम है. When you are marking speeches, it's very important that you keep in mind the speaker role fulfillment that they have done or not. That is to say, a basic thing what is expected out of a prime minister is giving context to the debate, is giving characterization to the debate कि debate कहाँ हो रही है, ये debate क्यों हो रही है, what is the idea of this debate and things like that. अगर प्राइम मिनिस्टर आके सीधा फर्स्ट मिनट से एनालिसिस के बारे में बोलने लगता है and he doesn't talk about characterization at all, you can't give him a good score because he hasn't fulfilled his speaker role requirement. अगर एक विप स्पीकर आके बस सामने वाले के पॉइंट्स को रिबट कर रहा है, you can't give them a good score there. Even if he or she has made the best rebuttals in this debate, you can't give them a good score because they haven't fulfilled their responsibility of thematizing the debate, of summarizing the debate, and giving you a biased feedback on what this debate was supposed to be. Therefore, as an adjudicator, always look into checking speaker role fulfillment. As an adjudicator, identify all clashes, principle and practical. In a believes that motion, you don't take into account practical things. In a will that motion, you do take into account principle justification, but only if they make sense practically, right? For example, if we go back to that motion, this house will ban CSR advertisement. If you look at that motion, if it was the opposition I told you about, कि यार ये तो it is not practically possible because जो receive कर रहे CSR funding, they can still go ahead and do the advertisement and they can still spread goodwill about this company, etc., etc. These are things which can be talked about in a will that motion because these are mechanical questions. These are questions about the actualization कि ये हो सकता है नहीं हो सकता है. Believe that motion is restricted to ये होना चाहिए नहीं होना चाहिए. If the motion was this house believes that CSR advertising should be banned, the question that I told you as an argument in opposition could not have been made, and even if it had been made, it would not have been credited by an adj. तो ये याद रखो with respect to identifying the clashes and stuff like that. If I have to talk about what are the don'ts of debate of edging, first thing, actively refrain from getting swayed by anything but content. I told you this that day also कि यार, and we saw this in a couple of edge feedbacks responses that we got from your end, that you had given speaker score you had given particular speaker score which was higher than everybody else in the room, but when you were asked who is the best speaker, you gave a different name. A possible reason is because probably you took into account mannerism of speaking, probably you took into account their accent, probably you took into account their language, probably you took into account their confidence level, probably you took into account their demeanor and stuff like that, their voice texture, and I don't know what. But as an adjudicator, you have to actively refrain from getting swayed by these things. All you have to take care is यार ये argument क्या बोल रहा है, ये रिबटल क्या कर रहा है, इसमें एनालिसिस दी है, इसने ये सिर्फ रिस्पॉन्स है, ये रिबटल है. दैट इज टू से ओनली रिस्ट्रिक्ट योर एजिंग टू कंटेंट इवन while मार्किंग स्पीकर्स. ठीक है. Upholding actively refrain from upholding preconceived notions stemming from / about personal opinion and ideal debate. That is to say कि अपना preconceived notion about कि यार मेरे personal opinion में तो इसका op है ही नहीं, ये मत सोचो, ये डिबेट रूम में मत लाओ. अपना प्रीकंसीव नोशन, बहुत बार इट हैपेंस कि एज एन एडजुडिकेटर यू आर सिटिंग इन अ रूम एंड बिफोर द डिबेट हैज स्टार्टेड यू रेड द मोशन, यू आर लाइक यार इस पे तो ये डिबेट होना चाहिए, इस पे तो ये बोलेगा गव, ये बोलेगा ऑफ, मजा आएगा. And people come into the room and they debate on a particularly and a completely different tangent, and you're like यार ये डिबेट तो मैंने एक्सपेक्ट नहीं किया था. It tends to happen that these kinds of edges, they tend to downmark teams for that. कि यार मैंने ये सोचा था पर आपने ये नहीं बोला यार, सॉरी सर. यार तो मैंने नहीं बोला. So that doesn't mean that the debate we had is not worth your time. As an adjudicator, you are supposed not to give in to your idea of what an ideal debate should have been. You're always expected to listen to what is happening at that point in time in the debate room and credit जीता कौन है, हारा कौन है, and mark on the basis of what has happened, not on the basis of what you thought should have happened. ठीक है. actively refrain from crediting assertions. I already told you assertions credit मत करो. अगर एनालिसिस नहीं दी है तो मत सुनो उनकी बात. आज फीडबैक में आके बोलो कि सर आपने शायद ये बात बोली थी पर आपने समझाई नहीं. अगर सब आप समझाएंगे नहीं तो हम कैसे आपको उसके लिए क्रेडिट करें. Then buying late dumps. I'm speaking specifically to and about whip speeches and reply speeches. यहाँ पे आप नया मैटर नहीं ला सकते, मतलब नहीं ला सकते. एज एन एडजुडिकेटर यू मस्ट बी वेरी अवेयर एंड कॉन्शियस कि कोई विप स्पीकर या कोई रिप्लाई स्पीकर नया मैटर तो नहीं ले आ रहा है, और अगर ला भी रहा है यू आर एक्सपेक्टेड टू रिफ्रेन फ्रॉम क्रेडिटिंग दैट. सो कीप दैट इन माइंड. एंड कंप्लीटिंग लिंक्स ऑफ एनालिसिस फॉर आइदर साइड और स्पीकर. बहुत बार ऐसा हुआ है एज एन एडजुडिकेटर. व्हाट पीपल हैव डन इज दैट देयर वर assertions, there were logical leaps, and it has been found that a particular edge completed those लिंक्स फॉर दैट पर्टिकुलर टीम की. अच्छा हाँ ये शायद ये बोलना चाह रहा था, अच्छा लग रहा है सुनने में, तो लेट मी क्रेडिट देम फॉर दिस आर्ग्यूमेंट. इट्स अ बिग नो 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 नो. ठीक है, क्योंकि इफ यू वर लिसनिंग टू द डिबेट फॉर 1 hour, द अदर टीम वाज आल्सो लिसनिंग टू द डिबेट फॉर 1 hour. अगर आप आके बोलते हो कि यार ये लोग ये बोलना चाहते थे और इसलिए मैंने इनको क्रेडिट करा है, दूसरी टीम बोलेगी चाहते थे ठीक है पर क्या बोला, क्या ये बात नहीं बोला ना, तो आपने कैसे दे दिया उनको डिबेट. सो be very conscious that you must not go ahead and you must not go ahead and complete links of analysis for any speaker any side. ये एक्टिवली रिफ्रेन फ्रॉम दिस. जो बोला उतना सुना उतना कंपेयर करा, बस खत्म. खुद से कुछ ऐड नहीं करना, डिलीट नहीं करना, मैनिपुलेट नहीं करना, कुछ नहीं करना. ठीक है, दैट्स फॉर डोंट्स. Miscellaneous में the first thing is MOV, margin of victory. Now this is really important because a lot of people express their concern with respect to यार हमें पता नहीं MOV क्या होता है. So I'll tell you what MOV क्या होता है. MOV दो तरह से समझा सकते हैं, numerical and notional. Numerical, so MOV basically is your margin of victory, कि अगर एक टीम जीती है तो वो कितने मार्जिन से जीती है. Numerical MOV is basically you looking at कि what is the cumulative speaker scores I've given to the winning side, what is the cumulative speaker scores I've given to the losing side, and I take that difference numerically speaking. And it's easy to understand also कि इतने numerical gap से या इतने numerical difference से ये टीम जीती है, ये टीम हारी है, that is your numerical MOV. Again इसमें भी एक categorization है, but before that I'll explain to you what notional MOV is. Now there are different categories of margin of victory. There is something called a close debate. It's easy to understand, right? कि यार ये debate बड़ी close थी, समझ में नहीं आ रहा था end तक जीतेगी कौन. There is a debate your margin of victory can be close to clear. कि यार हाँ यार close तो था but इतना भी close नहीं था कि समझ में नहीं आ रहा था कौन जीत रहा था, एक आइडिया था कि चलो ये जीत रहे. That is your close to clear. There is clear कि यार हाँ भाई ये तो क्लियरली जीत रहे, ये दूसरे साइड ने क्या करा भाई कुछ समझ ही नहीं आया, चलो भाई आप लोग क्लियरली जीत गए ये डिबेट. एंड फोर्थ इज थ्रैश, कि भाई इसमें मैं सोचने बैठ गया तो मैं पागल. दिस इज लाइक अ वन साइडेड डिबेट टू अनदर एक्सटेंट. इट्स अ थ्रैश. यू गाइज हैव वन बाय अ लैंडस्लाइड. देयरफॉर आई विल रिपीट द 4 categories and I'll write it here also for your reference. Close. Okay. Close to clear, clear, thrash. ठीक है. Now, these are 4 categories based on which you divide your MOV. कि यार मेरे को लगा ये क्लोज डिबेट था, या मेरे को लगा ये क्लोज टू क्लियर डिबेट था, यार ये मेरे को लगा ये क्लियर डिबेट था और थ्रैश डिबेट था. When you do this categorization not numerically but your idea कि यार ये डिबेट सुन के लगा ये क्लियर था, सुन के लगा क्लोज टू क्लियर था, सुन के लगा थ्रैश था, देन इट्स कॉल्ड अ नोशनल एमओवी. ठीक है, योर नोशनल एमओवी इज व्हाट योर आइडिया ऑफ दैट मार्जिन ऑफ विक्ट्री इज. इट माइट नॉट बी द न्यूमेरिकल नंबर एग्जैक्टली. न्यूमेरिकली जब आप एमओवी कैटेगराइज करते हो तो जब मैं आपको रेंज बता देता हूं, अगर आपका जो मार्जिन ऑफ विक्ट्री का डिफरेंस आया दैट इज समवेयर फ्रॉम 0 टू से 2 और 2.5, then we say it's a close debate. If it's a 2.5 to 4, then we say it's a close to clear debate. If it's a 4 to 8 ka MOV, then we say it's a clear debate. And if it's above 8, then to इफ इट्स अबव 8 देन इट्स अ क्रैश. ठीक है, ये आपकी कैटेगरीज है. तो बेसिकली दीज आर अगेन वेरी सब्जेक्टिव, हर एक टूर्नामेंट का थोड़ा डिफरेंट स्टांस होता है इस पे. बट ऑन अ मोटा मोटा लेवल, what is margin of victory, कि कितने margin से the winning side has defeated the losing side. There are two ways to look at a margin of victory. Notionally कि हाँ यार मेरे को लग रहा है कि ये close to clear debate था, या you assess that on the basis of the quality of the debate, not necessarily numerically. When you assess the margin of victory quantitatively, that is to say you take the cumulative of winning speaker scores awarded to winning side, and you look at the cumulative scores awarded to losing side, and you take the difference, that is your numerical MOV. And then you look at these ranges and you declare कि ये close debate था, या close to clear था, या clear था, या thrash था. Now note, very important, it's not necessary that your notional MOV is same as your numerical MOV, because a lot of times it might happen that your numerical MOV might be less than your notional MOV or more than your notional MOV based on speaker scores. Notional MOV is basically जब आप notionally कुछ बात करते हो, obviously you don't get into the nitty gritties of things. You look at one side मोटा मोटा, दूसरा side मोटा मोटा, and you compare. That's your notional. Speaker score, you get into the numerics of it, you get into the nitty gritties of it, and you say कि अरे ये margin of victory है. It's okay if they are not same, but they should be like आस पास होना चाहिए. For example, your numerical margin of victory can be close, but your notional margin of victory can be close to clear. However, your numerical margin of victory cannot be close and notional thrash. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता है. इतना vast difference between notional and numerical नहीं हो सकता है. But it can be different by a smaller margin. Speaker scores. A major mistake which you guys made in marking the speakers in that particular debate in the ad forms that we received is that you guys gave people 73, 74, 72, 40, some people gave 30, 32. Okay, let me repeat. In most debates, the range for your constructive speech, that is to say PM, DPM, GovWhip, LO, DLO, OpWhip, इन 6 स्पीचेस का रेंज मोस्टली होता है 69 to 81. ठीक है, रिप्लाई स्पीचेस, ऑप रिप्लाई, गव रिप्लाई, इनका रेंज होता है 35.5 to 40.5. Now 37.5 to 40.5, sorry. Now note that when marking speeches, it is ideally you are expected to start from the average value. In this case it's 75. आप 75 से शुरू करो. आप कभी 70 या 69 से शुरू नहीं करोगे ऊपर जाते जाते. नो, दैट इज नॉट हाउ यू गो अबाउट इट. You start with a 75 and you say कि यार ये कितना. If you think the person has said nothing in the debate, or he has made absolutely zero contribution, then you can give a 74.5 or a 74. That is enough indication कि अरे इसने कुछ नहीं किया. But if he has done the bare minimum of completing his speech, you have to, or you ideally should give him nothing less than a 75. अगर आपको अच्छा लग रहा है speech, then you go to a 77, you go to a 79, you go to 80, and 80, 81 is like कि ऐसा स्पीच तो हो ही नहीं सकता था, ये तो मैंने सोचा ही नहीं था. So it's very rare. You can obviously award 80s and 81s, but they are not theoretically possible. Just like you can't like theoretically give someone 100 in an English paper. Just like that, you can't give like 81 किसी को on a speech. But if on a subjective level you feel कि यार बहुत अच्छा बोल गया तो जरूर दो, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है. But the point I'm trying to make here is कि don't start marking from 69 and go upwards. Start from the middle value and go to the right or to the left. 75 से शुरू करो. अगर उसने कुछ नहीं किया तो 74.5. Otherwise 75 से आगे जाओ. ठीक है, that's with respect to your speaker scores. Starting at average value 69 और 81 speech बहुत मुश्किल से होती है. आप 69 किसी को दे ही नहीं सकते. मतलब I haven't heard anyone being given a 69 by an adj ever, however bad the speeches have been. 81 is also very rare, but then again it's up to your discretion. What is an adj feedback? Adj feedback is basically when you come back into the room and tell people कि यार आप जीते, आप हारे और इसलिए हुआ है. It's supposed to be a justification of two things, की verdict and MOV. Because आप रूम में घुसते ही आप डिक्लेयर करोगे यार गव wins this debate, and second thing you tell them is कि यार margin of victory is for me close to clear. सो फर्स्ट जॉब आपका जो बनता है वो ये है कि आप बाय द एंड ऑफ योर एज फीडबैक, बाय द एंड ऑफ द टाइम यू आर टेलिंग पीपल कि ये जीत आप ये जीते आप इसलिए हारे, इज टू मस्ट जस्टिफाई योर वर्डिक्ट एंड योर मार्जिन ऑफ विक्ट्री कि यार इतना मार्जिन क्यों था और ये क्यों जीते. दीज आर टू प्राइमरी थिंग्स दैट यू आर expected to justify. And appreciable edge feedback should be concise slash thematized. I already told you concise रखोगे thematized रखोगे तो लोगों का interest बना रहेगा, लोग सुनेंगे आपकी बातें and stuff like that. Highlight which clash was the clinching factor if any and why. जैसे I have told you बहुत ज़्यादा about this house will tax Zara for flouting environmental laws वाला motion. I think you guys realize now that locus of impact ki the locus of impact was expected to be on the company, but it's not necessarily true. It's the locus of impact is on the workers, which is pointed by opposition in this debate, is the clinching idea of this debate. That is something that your edge feedback should be very clear about ki what was the clinching clash slash argument made in this debate. That's something that should be there in your edge feedback. And appreciable edge feedback should pay equal attention to both sides. बहुत ज़्यादा लोग ये करते हैं कि people come into the room and they say कि अरे गव आप तो जीत ही गए, so let me address the op side. ये मत करना कभी. गव जो अगर आप उस आपने गव साइड को जिताया भी है, then also they want to know why you have uh, given them this debate. So refrain from addressing only one side and tactically see I'll address only the losing side ताकि वो मेरे को down mark ना कर दे. ये मत करो. Give equal attention to both sides and justify equally why they have lost or why they have won. Provide space slash time for questioning. Keep your ideally people are given like 7 minutes for the edge feedback. Try and bring your edge feedback down to 5 minutes. Try prepare a feedback in a fashion कि आपका 5 मिनट में edge feedback खत्म हो जाए. Post then you can have the flow for questions, because अगर आप 7 मिनट तक बक बक करते रहे and one team already has decided कि यार ये feedback में दम नहीं है, बट क्योंकि 7 मिनट हो चुके हैं वो आपको क्वेश्चन भी नहीं पूछ सकता, यू हैव लॉस्ट एन अपॉर्चुनिटी टू एक्सप्लेन टू दैट पर्टिकुलर साइड की व्हाई द थिंग्स यू आर सेइंग डू रियली मेक सेंस. सो if you leave space for questioning, then you have a better advantage at explaining yourself. So keep that room and keep that space when you are giving edge feedbacks. And edge feedback should never be constructive in nature. ये तो मैं bold करके underline italic सब कर देता हूँ. It should not be constructive in nature. What exactly I'm meaning by this? Suppose I go into a room and I say कि यार Gov takes this debate, Op loses. The reason Op loses this debate is yaar because Op should have said things like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. You have gotten a 0 in your edge score already, because you are talking about things now. The metric of your verdict is not what has happened in the debate, but your metric of your verdict has now become something which is based or premised on your preconceived notion, which already I have told you is a big no. Therefore, always ensure that your edge feedback is descriptive, not constructive. A constructive edge feedback looks like कि यार you lost this. What you should have done is probably A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Nobody wants to know that. ठीक है, जब आपका फीडबैक हो जाएगा मैं बाहर जाऊंगा, बाहर मेरा टाइम होगा, मैं आपसे पूछ लूंगा व्हाट कुड आई हैव डन बेटर. बट एज अ पार्ट ऑफ योर फीडबैक, व्हाइल यू आर गिविंग अ फीडबैक, बाय प्रिंसिपल फीडबैक मींस गिविंग, टेलिंग, लेटिंग पीपल नो कि व्हाट दे डिड. So you are never supposed to be constructive or let people know what they could have done better in an edge feedback. You just let them know what they did and full stop. आप बाहर जाओ and tell them if you want constructive, then I can offer outside the room. That is outside the room, but not during the edge feedback. Okay, guys, I am done with this. I think Riju had to leave, and therefore the recording would have had an issue. So Riju, bro, I'm done with the session as far as my content is concerned. I'll now be opening the floor for any sort of question, any sort of confusion that you guys might have with respect to anything that I said. For your benefit, I'll quickly just summarize the things that I have talked to you in this particular debate.